Call me an idealist, but I think that deep down, people are generally good. Heroes that we love are shining examples of this, but everyone, including our greatest protectors, is just one bad day away from becoming a villain. And with evil counterparts, we get to see how that would look like. Evil copies, evil clones, evil versions, whatever you want to call them, these characters are what happens when you take a good character and make an edgy knockoff that you know every 13-year-old is going to love. Usually these guys are made by the villain of the story or someone who has it out for the hero through either supernatural or scientific means for the express purpose of finally defeating the hero. Like they say, if you can't beat him, clone him. They could also be an alternate universe version of the hero or even just a completely different character that shares an uncanny amount of attributes with the hero, although evil versions of characters tend to be a whole lot less nice than their original counterparts. If your main character has a strict no-kill policy, you'll be sure that this guy is aiming to buy a nuke with his kill streak. If your hero wears bright, lively colors, this guy looks like he just went to a Hot Topic after a funeral. If your main character's name is Bob, chances are this guy is named Evil Bob, or Dark Bob, or Shadow Bob, or Nega Bob, or Anti-Bob. Not the most original names, but they work. The idea of making an evil version of a hero is not exactly original, but like I mentioned before, it really does work. These characters tend to be well liked and popular amongst fans, and if the game they're from is part of a franchise, they'll normally appear several times throughout the series. I think the reason why we like these evil counterpart characters is because of a sort of morbid curiosity hidden in all of us. Like I said, I do think that people are generally good, but even so, there still is a curiosity for evil within all of us. We all tend to wonder from time to time, what would it look like if Ryu or Goku or Mario were evil? What would they do? How brutal would they be? What kind of damage would they cause? A lot of the time, the hero characters are some of the most powerful entities on the planet. Them being evil would surely mean that the world is just screwed and that the whole story would be over. So obviously we can't have our hero just deciding to turn evil. Evil versions of these characters allow writers to explore that possibility and let us see what the alternate universe scenario would look like. What would our hero look like if they didn't have a moral code or an upstanding sense of justice? In some cases, not having morality holding them back might even make them more effective at defeating evil, but that's a whole other conversation. And conversations suck. We want to see action. One of the best parts about having a main character and an evil version of the main character is we get to see them fight. Two people with the same strengths, the same weaknesses, the same abilities go head to head. It's like a mirror match in a fighting game. It's the ultimate test of who's the better player. You can't blame a bad matchup or a lack of knowledge of your enemy's moveset because you are your enemy. Sometimes the evil version will actually be stronger than the original. The evil version might have dark, souped-up versions of the hero's moves, and or completely new moves altogether. Making the evil counterpart more powerful than the original is a really good way to make the situation feel more dire. You're fighting a stronger version of yourself. If they're basically just you, but better, how do you even win that? This is what makes evil versions so cool. Now, there are a couple of different subtypes of the evil version trope. The first is the evil side of the character's heart. This is someone who is basically the evil part of a character's self. Nega Scott is a silent evil materialization of Scott's flaws from Scott Pilgrim vs. the World. Nega Scott represents all of the issues and mistakes that Scott has made over the years. Battlein from Celeste similarly is a manifestation of the main character's problems. Although, unlike Nega Scott who keeps his opinions to himself, Battlein loves to talk and constantly make fun of Madeline. The shadow characters from Persona 4 Arena are basically the same things as the previous two examples, although, in this case, it's a lot more fun since we get shadow versions of the majority of the cast instead of just one character, and the shadow versions even have different abilities that the original versions don't have, and vice versa, with the original versions having their own neat tricks too. The whole being a construct made from the main character's flaws thing is a nice plot device to allow the hero to confront their internal problems in an external way. Sometimes they have to be taken out with a punch to the face like any other foe, but some stories try to be a bit more symbolic and metaphorical, with the only way to truly defeat the shadow version of the hero is for the hero to accept the shadow version as a part of themselves. By accepting it, the main character accepts their own flaws and insecurities, allowing them to be a better person. You really can't go wrong with this subtype. The second subtype is the straight up evil clone. This is basically a copy of the character often created in order to defeat the original. Dark Link from the Zelda series is a classic example of the trope used in video games. He doesn't really have a personality or anything interesting about him, but hey, Link with red eyes is kinda cool. Riku Replica from Kingdom Hearts Chain of Memories is a really good example of the evil clone. He was created to fight the original Riku, though interestingly, he ended up having his own character arc about his struggles with his identity due to being a clone, which is honestly really cool considering the original Riku's story also deals with his own identity issues due to his actions in the first game of the series. Dark Pit from Kid Icarus Uprising is another interesting take on the trope. The thing about Dark Pit is technically he's incomplete. Before a truly evil version of Pit could be created, the process was interrupted, making Dark Pit less of an evil Pit and more like a slightly edgier mirror of Pit. A darker but not necessarily evil character like this has a ton of potential because depending on the situation, they can either be a villain or a hero or something in between. Dark Pit himself fits the bill of the last option. He chooses not to lessen himself by taking on the position of an errand boy to the benevolent goddess Palutena like Pit does, but he also chooses not to do the same thing for Palutena's evil enemy, Medusa. Instead, he chooses to fight for himself and do what he wants. The third subtype of the evil version is the evil off-brand character. This is a character who is actually their own character with their own backstory, ideals, and motives, but essentially they're just a darker version of a character that we already know. It's like copying someone's homework but changing it up a little bit. Like Shadow the Hedgehog. He's like Sonic the Hedgehog. They're both hedgehogs, they're both fast, and they both are pretty cocky, but instead of solving his problems with the power of friendship, Shadow solves his problems with the power of an AK-47. Shadow doesn't play by the rules, and depending on the writer, he's either a hero, a villain, or something in between. They even made a whole game about his struggles to find his own path. Wario is an evil counterpart to Super Mario, but he forgoes the cliched darker color palette and overall edginess used by evil versions, and instead he has a bright yellow and purple color scheme. Instead of being a simple recolor or an inverse of Mario, Wario is more like an exaggerated version of Mario. He's thicker, stronger, and a whole lot greedier. Crunch Bandicoot from Crash Bandicoot Wrath of Cortex, like Wario, is an exaggerated evil counterpart to the game's main character, Crash Bandicoot. They're both Bandicoot experiments by Dr. Cortex, but Crunch is bigger, has darker fur, and an overall wilder design than Crash. He also has elemental powers to give himself a bit of his own identity as well. I think that the evil off-brand character probably has the most potential out of the three subtypes simply because the evil off-brand character is their own character at the end of the day. While evil sides and evil clones will always just be shameless copies whose existence is tethered to the original, evil off-brand characters can potentially go in their own direction and forge a path that has next to nothing to do with the original. Evil versions of characters are interesting because they allow us to see what would happen if our hero took a different path, if they made one different decision that changed everything. While the idea of an evil version of someone is a bit cliche by modern standards, the different subtypes allow for unique ways to have fun with the idea and put new spins on it. Let's face it, everyone can be a little edgy sometimes, and it's nothing to get all up in arms about. It can potentially lead to some fun interactions and cool new characters.